Welcome. This is our Dragon Master series. I'm Dr. Madeleine Muller, and in Module 1, we're going to be looking at the neurophysiology of emotion and behavior. And we're going to study a little bit about why people, and sometimes even you, can be such a pain in the ass. And a large part of this work is grounded in effective neuroscience, as outlined by Panksepp, but also I've put together a whole lot of different frameworks to create this very simple analogy. So I'm going to be using the analogy of a dragon, and that will be happening throughout the series. It's not uncommon for us to speak about an inner dragon that we need to keep a handle on, so to speak. But I've developed and fleshed out this analogy, and I find this probably the most useful way to describe the ways our brain works, and to describe the way that our emotion affects our behavior. So I want you to imagine that our brain, as an integrated whole, always has a dragon aspect and has a master that's controlling that dragon. The dragon aspect is our survival brain. So the actual brain within the dragon is that of the limbic, the mammalian, as well as the reptilian brain. And the purpose of the dragon, the reason why we have a dragon, is for survival. And it includes our whole endocrinological system, our whole body, our whole muscular system. And you can imagine it's this beautiful, powerful, but rather stupid dragon that we all have. But then much newer in our evolution, we also have an executive brain that's different from the animal kingdom, for example, especially the prefrontal cortex that we're going to look at. And our executive brain holds all our higher values and ideals. So the purpose of this part of us is actually self-actualization. It has to do with meaning. It has to do with finding purpose in our life. And that's quite different than the survival part of ourselves. And this, I want you to imagine, is like a dragon master that needs to control, steer, and guide and integrate with this beautiful dragon. The picture that I've got here is from the film Avatar. It's a film about a distant planet, and the inhabitants of this planet, when they are riding these dragons, they literally physically unite with these dragons, and they're actually able to experience everything the dragon is experiencing, but they decide where this dragon is going to be going. So what's important to understand is that when we go through the day, every single day of our lives, we're actually always in one of two modes, depending on which one of these two brains are actually leading. So of course, the whole brain takes part in on all the different kinds of things we do, but there's usually one of these two that are calling the shots, that's driving and deciding what's going to happen and where we're going to go. So we can either have the dragon that's in charge, and at that moment, the dragon is leaving. So our survival brain is in charge, and this will be the limbic part of the brain that's actually calling the shots. And there are three important sort of important things to the survival brain, to the dragon. The first is it doesn't like pain. So anything that's going to threaten it can put it into fight, flight, freeze mode, for example. There's particular things that it needs. So just like the animal kingdom, we need food, we need a safe place to stay at night. For human beings, that includes citizenship, for example. We need a tribe. Those are the people that we hang out with, our family, and also our larger community of people that we connect with. Power is very important to the dragon. The more power you have in a particular society or hierarchy, the more you can influence your own possible survival. And sex is always seen as a main drive, but here I'm not just talking simply about the sex drive. I'm talking about that need that we have as a human being to connect with a person, to have our particular person that we have a very deep and special connection with. And that can either be sexual or it can just be an intimate relationship with somebody. And that was genetically determined to get people to link up and raise their young, so to speak. If there's also a third mode that the dragon can be in, and that's the energy preservation mode. That's the lying on the couch neutral mode. It's the mode we're quite often in when we do activities like brushing our teeth or even driving to work if there's not too much traffic. And it's the I don't really feel like it mode. And those are all parts of what the dragon is like, what the dragon experiences very strongly. But when the dragon is not controlling, there's not in charge of what's happening in that particular moment of time, then it's possible for our executive brain to come into play. So during the day, you'll have time when your survival brain is maybe more in dominance, and then there's parts of the day when your executive brain is leading. And the executive brain brings there's lots of different qualities that belongs to our cerebral cortexes, but these particular four is going to be very important when we talk about emotion and behavior. So the first is our ability to plan. So our ability to actually decide, I'm going to set an alarm clock and I'm going to get up at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning, or I'm going to be enrolling for a particular course, or I'm going to be applying for a particular job. So our ability to plan into the future. Our ability to have empathy, so our ability to step into somebody else's shoes and actually mirror and have an inkling of what they might be experiencing, feeling with somebody else. Our ability to reflect, so that is looking back on things that are happened in the past, but also our ability to reflect on what's happening in the present. So we are able as human beings to think about our thinking. Matter of fact, we're able, like we're doing now, to think about the fact that we think about our thinking, et cetera, et cetera. And then our ability to actually have inhibitory control or self-control. So that is that decision to not eat that cookie, that decision to actually get out of bed when the alarm clock goes, even when your dragon does not feel like getting out of bed, and is the way that we actually control all these drives that our dragon might be presenting with. So these two modes, sort of during the day, we switch between these two modes, and what sort of partly determines whether the dragon is going to be controlling or going to be leading is to a large aspect to do with adrenaline. So when we have adrenaline in our system, always our body will go into survival mode, and then we will start finding ourselves sort of this automatic behaviors of the survival brain comes to the fore. And so any threat to our physical safety, any threat to our emotions or emotional safety, or anything that prohibits us from able to do the things that we want to do, to be who we are, or to be able to live the kinds of lives we want to lead, if we feel under threat, adrenaline is going to go up and our survival brain is going to step forward. Now, the way we behave when the survival brain is leading and the way we behave when our executive brain is believing is completely different. And as a matter of fact, it can sometimes feel like we're two completely different people. So let's compare and contrast what that might look like. So on the right-hand side here, we're going to see what it looks like when the dragon is in charge and the dragon is leading. You can see our master there is not quite managing. And just credits to my child, Benji Miller, who's done the illustrations for this. And on the left-hand side here, we can see what it happens when we sort of got this dragon under control and our executive brain is actually leading. So when the dragon is under control, we get very much a view that is focusing on survival, remember? So we get tunnel vision or we get street view. And street view is a bit like those video games where you're literally only seeing what's happening right in front of you at the moment. When our dragon is in control, it's a very subconscious way of behaving because our focus is to very quickly deal with threat. And so we're not really consciously thinking through a lot of the stuff that we're doing. And this particular view of the world is quite paranoid and quite vigilant. We often hear the term the snowflakes, people who seem to be very sensitive and overly sensitive. And I don't like the word overly sensitive. That's a dragon judgment on that sensitivity, but it gives a picture of somebody who might be more vigilant and actually is feeling more anxious. So when we talk about people who are being snowflakes, we are talking of people who are feeling anxious and who are feeling under threat already, and we need to be able to recognize that. That need to call somebody a snowflake is that emotive judgment, which is very much a dragon activity. So, and we see that very powerfully on social media, this need to come with a very strong judgment to anything that we might find different or threatening. And very important, this view is biologically driven. So our genetic code drops it in, our endocrinological system literally drops in, and you have this biological impulses to actually act on these emotions. So what does it look like when we're not in dragon view? Well, then we're able to actually now, prefrontal cortex is leading. We now have access to our whole brain. And now we're actually able to be conscious. We're much more awake than we are when we are in dragon view. And now you can see the context and the perspective of something that's happening. When we are in this mode, we are calm. We are integrated, a lovely term from Daniel Siegel. And Brene Brown talks about being generous in assumptions, which is the opposite of that emotive judgment that we so often see in social media. We can start seeing what lies behind a specific behavior. And quite often we speak about this as our higher consciousness, where our higher values and our higher ideals come from. If we're in dragon mode, it affects the way we think, and we have different kinds of thinking. And Daniel Kahneman talks about these as slow and fast thinking. So when we're in dragon mode, our thinking becomes very fast because we have to solve a scenario quite quickly, and the thinking is bound to be quite irrational. So what happens when you're in dragon mode is you try and make very quick decisions and very black and white decisions to be able to quickly act on information. So this is where we make assumptions, where we jump to conclusions with minimal information. This is the couch expert that knows everything about things that he's never even read up about. And our thinking is very black and white when we are in dragon mode. This kind of thinking is emotional, it's quite unstable, it's very inconsistent, and it can be helpful in physical threats. So it's quite an automatic way in how we think about the world, but not the cleverest part of ourselves. So those times when you say something stupid or you end up doing something that you later think, oh my goodness, why did I do that? That's definitely your dragon that stepped to the fore. If, however, our prefrontal cortex is able to engage and we now the adrenaline is not too high in our system, we can now engage with focused attention. So this is now where you're able to use your whole brain and solve a maths problem, for example. The dragon can't do maths. But your master brain is able to learn a foreign language, learn a complicated musical instrument, but it takes effort. You will actually feel your brain getting tired when you're engaging in this kinds of activity. This makes it possible for us to interpret information, to be rational and logical. For those of us who are scholars or scientists, when you then look at information, you're really able to now see all the perspectives, try and understand the different arguments from different points of view. This kind of thinking is very deliberate. We apply our thinking to a specific problem, and this is also where we are at our most intelligent. And those brilliant moments you've had in your life has all happened in this mode. So let's think a little bit about behavior, and we're going to look in some of the future modules at this in much more detail. So when we are in dragon mode, for example, we might be quite self-focused. We might be quite proud or even narcissistic. When we call people narcissistic, that's definitely the dragon that we are describing. Dragon mode can be very manipulative. It can come downright to bullying. But it can also be quite avoidant, apathetic, insecure, not engaging. And whenever we see aggression, or wherever we feel there's risk or danger, you can be sure it's this dragon that is coming into play. When we are in executive function, when we have our whole brain available to ourselves, now our authentic self can actually step forward. And now we have these extraordinary qualities, like being able to be compassionate, being able to be tolerant to other people and understand other people's point of view, being able to be humble, being able to understand things like equality and equity and where I sit within a larger society and community. Now we're able to be generous to others and not only hoard, for example, resources to ourselves. When we are at our most creative and innovative, we are definitely within this mode of ourselves. And this makes it also possible for us to be flexible and adapt to different kinds of scenarios. This is where we are at our most supportive. This is where we're at our most loving. And our best parenting, our best relationship part of ourselves comes to the fore when we are in this mode. When you look at these two different, you can almost think of these as two different people. They would seem like they're completely different from two different universes. But actually, each of us is able to, in dragon view, become quite nasty at times. And when we are in our authentic self mode, be quite extraordinary. And being able to learn how to manage these two modes gives us the possibility to start influencing our behavior to be more in line with our higher values and our higher ideas. Just a last word on some of the emotions that you will see, and we will study those in more detail in some of the future modules. The dragon tends to trigger these very negative emotions because it all has to do with survival. So grief, panic, like for example, when we've been abandoned or when we are lost, the feeling of fear and the feelings of rage. Where if we are in this more authentic selves of ourselves, we're now able to have the emotions that we typically talk about is where we are at our happiest. So when we're caring for somebody else, for children or for a loving partner or a friend, play when we're doing things for the sake of just loving what we're doing, and seek when we are learning and exploring and solving problems. Thank you very much. That's been our first little module explaining the neurophysiology of our dragon. In our next module, we're going to start focusing much more understanding the dragon in a lot of detail and being able to understand how that influences behavior.